Then Ashwapati answered to the seer, I deemed a mighty power had come with her. Is not that power the high compeer of fate? But Narad answered, covering truth with truth, a day may come when she must stand unhelped on a dangerous brink of the world's doom, and her carrying the world's future on her lonely breast, carrying the human hope in a heart left so to conquer or fade on a last desperate verge.
Good morning. So we're reading in Book 6, the Book of Fate, Canto 2, the Way of Fate and the Problem of Pain. We've come to page 458, 9 lines down from the top. So I've mentioned that this canto was the last that Sri Aurobindo worked on this poem just prior to his passing away in 1950. And it's one of the most interesting and philosophically profound cantos in the poem, dealing with this issue of fate and especially why there is pain and suffering in this world, in a world that is created by the divine, who is all good and all bliss. So why has he created such a place as this, full of suffering and pain? So it's a very complex philosophical issue, which Sri Aurobindo deals with in a number of different ways in the canto. There's different aspects to the problem and to the solution. And we've already covered most of it. We're kind of coming towards the end of the canto. But he has already explained that this world is evolving from the inconscience of matter, from just an absolute absence of consciousness. And it's evolving towards an awakening of consciousness and awakening of the divine consciousness here in the world. And he suggests that this pain arose out of this inconscience right from the beginning, and it was, in a sense, a spur towards growth, towards the evolution. That if it wasn't there, then the being would have just lain down content or just wanting to fall back into the inconscience again and not wake up. So it forced, in a sense, this movement of life, this awakening of life and mind in the inconscience. And then he also speaks of the avatar and the incarnation of the divine in the world, and how the divine incarnate in a human being takes on himself this suffering in order to lead mankind, lead the world out of the inconscience towards a divine consciousness. So he too comes into the world and suffers. He takes on the human body and this outer human personality, even though within he's conscious of his divinity, of his unity with the divine. But outwardly too he suffers, and in his consciousness he's united with the world around. And so he takes on that same suffering that's all around him. And at the same time, he calls into his being the higher levels of consciousness that are evolving in humanity. He brings those powers down, establishes them in the manifestation in the world so that it can proceed higher and higher, step by step, in its evolution towards the divine consciousness. And then he speaks of another issue of how the soul first lives in the absolute divine consciousness in a world of bliss, infinity, freedom, and complete absence of any pain or suffering. But the soul chooses to descend into this world. He says, the soul is itself the author of its suffering. It has chosen to come, to descend into the world. But there is a divine purpose behind it also, and it's to establish this divine manifestation in the world through the course of evolution. And there is also this whole adventure of consciousness that takes place in the course of that evolution. All the different stages of life and being are gradually manifested. So it says that the soul, tired of its eternal bliss and its eternal oneness with everything, and it longed for the adventure into the ignorance, into the darkness, to see what possibilities lie there, and to manifest those possibilities. So it has come down and it labors over the long course of the evolution. The soul evolves gradually, developing its consciousness more and more, till it can again reunite with the divine, but now within a human body, or within a body, within a eventually transformed body, substance. So that is the destiny of the world and of the consciousness that's evolving. So all of these issues he's discussed. And then I should just mention that, for a context, that this episode takes place after Savitri reveals her choice of a mate, Satyavan, to her parents. So she's just met Satyavan, she's traveled through the world looking for her soulmate, found him, and has revealed her choice to her parents, the king and queen. And Narad, the heavenly sage, happens to be there at the time, and he reveals that Satyavan is destined to die in exactly 1 year's time. So the queen, Savitri's mother, questions why should Savitri, encounter this fate, this beautiful soul? Why should she suffer such a fate to marry someone who's going to die in just 1 year's time? So this is Narad's reply to the queen. And she questions, why is there this suffering in the world, and so forth. So now we'll continue. Maybe I'll just read a little bit from the ending from last time on page 457 towards the bottom. Here again, Narad is explaining something of his answer about this issue. He's talking about mankind looking at life and the world around with its pain and suffering. And he says, the will of the timeless, working out in time, in the free absolute steps of cosmic truth, he thinks, that is, mankind thinks, a dead machine or unconscious fate. And he says, the magician's formulas have made matter's laws, and while they last, all things by them are bound. But the Spirit's consent is needed for each act, and freedom walks in the same pace with law. All here can change if the magician choose. If human will could be made one with God's, if human thought could echo the thoughts of God, man might be all-knowing and omnipotent. But now he walks in nature's doubtful ray. Yet can the mind of man receive God's light. The force of man can be driven by God's force. Then is he a miracle, doing miracles. For only so can he be nature's king. It is decreed, and Satyavan must die. The hour is fixed, chosen the fatal stroke. What else shall be is written in her soul. But till the hour reveals the fateful script, the writing waits illegible and mute. So that's where we've left off. So B, would you like to start from there?
Fate is truth working out in ignorance. O King, thy fate is a transaction done at every hour between nature and thy soul, with God for its foreseeing arbiter. Fate is a balance drawn in destiny's book. Man can accept his fate, he can refuse. Even if the one maintains the unseen decree, he writes thy refusal in the credit page. For doom is not a close, a mystic seal, arisen from the tragic crash of life, arisen from the body's torture and death. A spirit rises mightier by defeat. Its godlike wings grow wider with each fall. Its splendid failures sum to victory. O man, the events that meet thee on thy road, though they smite thy body and soul with joy and grief, are not thy fate. They touch thee a while and pass. Even death can cut not short thy spirit's walk. Thy goal, the road thou choosest, are thy fate. On the altar, throwing thy thoughts, thy heart, thy works, thy fate is a long sacrifice to the gods, till they have opened to thee thy secret self, and made thee one with the indwelling God.
Thank you. Let's pause there. Now, most of you know that every month I've been giving a talk about Savitri, and recently I've been speaking about picking a passage from Savitri and reflecting on it, bringing sometimes different writings from Sri Aurobindo and Mother that pertain to it. So one of the talks I gave was on this passage, kind of beginning here, but maybe extending for a few more pages. But I want to read some of what I wrote for that, because it explains this passage in detail. And this particular passage is one of the kind of most philosophically complex, I think. So let me just read a little bit from that talk. So let's begin with the first line. Fate is truth working out in ignorance. This seems to suggest first that there is such a thing as fate, a kind of predestined condition of things in course of events in the world. And second, it suggests that fate is a certain truth of things that is gradually being revealed over time, or rather worked out over time, in or under the conditions of ignorance. And this distinction between revealed and worked out draws a line between the idea of revealed, which suggests that fate is fixed or static and simply behind a curtain that is being removed, and the idea of worked out, which implies that fate may be more malleable, plastic, or living, that it may be at least partially in the process of being formed in this ignorance under its present particular conditions, and that its unfolding is occurring within a play of forces, favorable and unfavorable, worked out rather than revealed. The term in ignorance implies that we who live in this ignorance and are undergoing this fate and its consequences can see neither the truth that is being gradually worked out, nor the course of its unfolding over time. Whereas there is or may be a state of knowledge where these things are known, we are not in that state, and therefore we feel we are being subjected to a process of unfolding that we can neither understand nor control. Truth working out in ignorance also seems to suggest that this ignorance in which things are being worked out is itself the truth in an unfinished state of unfolding. This is a more profound idea which relates to the philosophical duality of being and becoming, a kind of static condition of being, the reality of what is, perhaps its essential truth, and a dynamic, more outward and fluid condition of becoming, in which the being is in a condition of flexibly becoming in space and time, or realizing what it is in its essential reality. And the next sentence, consisting of 3 lines, presents again a juxtaposition of 2 different statuses of being and becoming. O King, thy fate is a transaction done at every hour between nature and thy soul, with God for its foreseeing arbiter. Arbiter is like a judge, one who decides. So it first describes a dynamic status of becoming that is being worked out as a transaction at every hour between nature and the soul. And then it describes an overseeing status of God, who is the foreseeing arbiter of this transaction. An arbiter is like a judge, one who is empowered to decide matters of disagreement or dispute between 2 parties. But God is a foreseeing arbiter, which suggests he knows what is unfolding in the course of these transactions in the becoming. In the dynamic status of becoming, fate is stated to be a transaction that is going on at every hour between nature and the soul. Here is another kind of duality, in which the former duality, that of being and becoming, is kind of reproduced in the terms of the becoming. Within the becoming, this unfolding, there is a soul, which represents the being in the conditions of the becoming. Our soul is a representative of the being of God here in the ignorance. Our soul is in a moment-to-moment transaction with nature, a transaction which is being adjudicated by God, who has the final authority over any disputes. The soul, being a representative of the being here in the becoming, is the truth of our individual being, which is gradually being worked out by our nature over time. This bifurcation between the soul and nature in the conditions of the becoming in the ignorance is crucial to the concept of fate that Sri Aurobindo is describing, which will be elaborated in the lines that follow. This is because the soul is a kind of representative of God within each individual being, the being that is being worked out by nature over time. In effect, the soul has a precedence over nature, a command over nature, because it is the soul's truth that is being worked out over time by its nature. Or put another way, it is the nature's role to become the truth of the soul. That is what our nature is, the gradual becoming over time of the truth of our soul. And then there is this continual transaction taking place between the soul and nature. We could say that the soul is guiding or steering the nature in its activity and moving it in the direction of this working out of its truth. The nature is ignorant, something like a complex machine or automobile, and left to its own processes, it would move ignorantly this way and that. But behind it, there is a soul that is steering it towards a particular destination through the winding, crowded streets of universal nature. The crucial question becomes, who has the upper hand in this driving? The conscious soul who is trying to steer the car, or the wayward, mechanical meanderings of the ignorant nature? This is the transaction that is being worked out moment to moment in our lives. Will we follow our soul, or will we follow our nature's ignorant movements? The idea of God being the arbiter suggests that the divine being is watching over the evolutionary progress of each individual soul in its moment-to-moment transactions with its nature. After all, the soul is the representative of God in the ignorant nature. So it is but natural that God should oversee the soul's progress in steering the nature to its intended destination. The significance of the transaction, which determine the direction the car moves at any given moment, as well as their arbitration, is elaborated in the lines that follow. First, consider the significant line, "Fate is a balance drawn in destiny's book." Here, Narad makes a subtle distinction between fate and destiny. It suggests that fate is more like the present conditions in which the individual is stationed. Our fate may be to live in favorable or unfavorable conditions, to be rich or poor, to have a pleasant life or a wretched one, to have a developed mind, life, and body, or an undeveloped one. It suggests that destiny, in contrast, is more akin to the goal to which the course of our evolution is headed. Destiny is the destination. Fate is our present location on the journey. So Narad said that fate is a transaction done at every hour. There is therefore a new balance that is drawn after each transaction between the soul and nature. The more we follow the soul, the higher our balance in destiny's book. Or in the terms of our other metaphor, the more we follow our soul, the more precisely our lives are steered towards our soul's destination, and the sooner we will arrive, that is, to our soul's truth, to our true being, and to God. And next there is the striking sentence, "Man can accept his fate, he can refuse." This goes back to the distinction made earlier about fate being the working out of truth in the ignorance versus it being the revealing of truth over time. This line strongly emphasizes the former interpretation And this more dynamic view of fate was also supported by the idea of fate being a transaction done at every hour between the soul and nature. But here the sage says that we can refuse our fate, that is, our present status, position, and direction in our evolutionary journey. It is the soul in us who accepts or refuses our fate, the representative of God in our humanity. Nature is the soul's becoming over time, and the soul is the driver of the process. It can step on the brake, turn the car around, and step on the accelerator. Whereas we are where we are on the evolutionary path, we can decide to move off our present location and go elsewhere. We are not compelled to continue circling round nature's cul-de-sacs. We can turn onto a different road that leads directly to our destination, and we can drive fast or slow. And then the next three lines harken back to the notion that God is the arbiter of the transactions. To repeat, even if the one maintains the unseen decree, he writes thy refusal in thy credit page. For doom is not a close, a mystic seal. If the soul refuses its fate, its present conditions, and apparent future course, it can, or at least it can try, to alter these. If the momentum of nature is too much for it, the balance of its karma too adverse, its accumulated debts too high to wipe out in a single stroke, God, the arbiter, will nevertheless take note of the soul's refusal. Its very attempt to refuse will go on to the credit side of the ledger of its transactions with nature, and will certainly help its future fate, if not immediately in the present. It essentially suggests that every effort we make in support of our soul's evolution, even though it may presently fail to attain its objective, is still helpful for our spiritual progress and leaves its mark. And then Narad says that the ordeals we face in life are not really our fate. They are just passing incidents in the growth and evolution of our soul. Even what seems to be the most adverse fate, an early death, as in the case of Satyavan, does not stop our soul's progress. Indeed, like our struggles and sufferings, death may even help the soul in its growth. We may note that the threat of death, our very mortality, our knowledge that our days are numbered, may be one of the most powerful spurs in our spiritual growth. It drives us to concentrate ourselves on what is important, on what we would like to achieve in our life. At the same time, it impels us to find the meaning of life. It presents us with its looming finality, the mystery of our existence, a mystery which propels us inwards towards the immortal element within us, the soul. And in a more practical way, death enables us to end one chapter of our spiritual evolution so that we may begin a new chapter in the next life. But it is the last line that's most pregnant with significance. thy goal, the road thou choosest are thy fate. What the sage seems to imply here is that our fate is not the immediate circumstances of our life, but rather the direction of our movement and the goal towards which we are aiming. It is as if he were looking down at life from some higher altitude. At the ground level, we see only the immediate environment. But if we look at ourselves from high above, we would see the topography of the surrounding area, the direction in which we are headed, the terrain of the path ahead, and the beauty of the destination. Looking from above, we would not be distracted by the details of our present location, but would see our life and fate in the wider perspective of its position on the map of our spiritual journey's route. So I think that helps elaborate some of that passage. So let's continue. Crystal.
We're at 775?
O soul, intruder.
Okay. O soul, intruder in nature's ignorance, armed traveler to the unseen supernal heights, thy spirit's fate is a battle and ceaseless march against invisible opponent powers, a passage from matter into timeless self, adventurer through blind, unforeseeing time, a forced advance through a long line of lives. It pushes its spearhead through the centuries. Across the dust and mire of the earthly plain, on many guarded lines and dangerous fronts, in dire assaults, in wounded, slow retreats, holding the ideals ringed and battered fort, or fighting against odds in lonely posts, or camped in night around the bivouac's fires, awaiting the tardy trumpets of the dawn, in hunger and in plenty and in pain, through peril and through triumph and through fall, through life's green lanes and over her desert sands, up the bald moor, along the sunlit ridge, in serried columns with a strangling rear, led by its nomad vanguard's signal fires, marches the army of the way lost God. Then late the joy ineffable is felt, then he remembers his forgotten self. He has refound the skies from which he fell.
Thank you. Let's pause. Here Sri Aurobindo likens the evolving soul through its many lifetimes to that of a soldier in war, in battle. So he says, that the spirit's fate is a battle and a ceaseless march. It's not a smooth, easy-going development through life. It's hard. It's difficult. We face this pain and suffering in life. And for many people, we actually face, this reality of war through many lives. We face these things which he's describing here, facing the dire assaults in wounded, slow retreats. We experience these things. It's not just a metaphor. It is a metaphor, but it's more than that. It's a reality of the soul that it experiences in its lifetimes.
In the first line, intruder in nature's ignorance, comes also to me as something like the science who are searching, working out the nature's processes and to handle it. Why he uses this word intruder in nature's process?
Yeah, because he has described the soul as descending from its divine home. Earlier he had described this, that we had chosen to descend here into the ignorance. So the soul is self-aware. It's aware of its unity with the divine, with God. But it intrudes here into this ignorance. It then descends into the world. So in that sense, it's an intruder because it's very different from the nature that it embodies here in the world, in the ignorance. So it intrudes here in order to evolve here and to raise the nature, to lift it towards a higher divine nature. From suffering and pain to divine bliss, from ignorance to knowledge, from weakness to power.
Isn't it interesting how he mixes up all these different metaphors? You have the traveler, the armed traveler, you have the adventurer, you have the soldier, but then the soldier is actually connected to an army.
Right.
Because it's going against matter and all of these things. But what I'm trying to make this connection back to Savitri and Bhavan, because Bhavan's ignorant of his fate. He doesn't know that he's going to die in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So she is saving him from his fate.
Yeah.
So how does that work? So we're ignorant maybe of our fate and we get help from the avatar, or how would you see that dynamic mixed in with the traveler and all these soldiers?
Well, he represents the soul descended into the ignorance and gradually evolving. So he represents, in a sense, us, I think. And yes, she comes to save. She comes, the Divine Mother, descending, bringing the light, bringing the power down and rescuing us, humanity also, from, this suffering life, to raise it to a higher divine nature.
But see, he dies and she does all the work.
Yeah.
He didn't consent to anything.
Yeah. Well, we also don't know, right? I mean, a few people may know about Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, but the vast majority of humanity have no idea what's happening. And, and he's described this work of the avatar and how the avatar is taking on these challenges, these difficulties of the evolution, bringing down this higher divine consciousness into the physical body, into the frame of nature.
But then you could deduce that we don't have to worry because our fate is being looked after.
Right. Yeah.
We just have to do the best we can.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's also described kind of our role a little bit, lean on heaven's strength and, just make your daily way a pilgrimage towards the divine. Gradually, you will grow in the light. Don't turn to the way of the Titan. Kind of follow the middle way.
Sri Aurobindo describes Satyavana as also a yogi, a Vedanta, a seeker.
Yeah.
And he said he's gone through many things and places, but he's never found who he was looking for. So he kind of represents, as Sri Aurobindo says, a godhead of the human soul.
Yeah.
That is struggling, but also it is not any.
Yeah, he's not a typical human being. He's more in touch with his soul than.
And that this, I think, is described in the Satyavana chapter.
But the soul is kind of, even the soul is sort of trapped in this life,
and he also I think Satyavan says, I have gone through all the world and I have found myself. That means both of them are realized beings actually. But I've missed the world, and when I found the world, I missed the self. So I didn't find anything which can unite both.
Right.
So he is not just any ordinary human man.
Right. But there was this other thing that you kind of raised, B, and that was about this army. And I think that also alludes to the idea that there is a collective work to be done, that it's not just the individual soul progressing and finding its way out of the ignorance, that the individual soul is here as part of a larger work to transform the world, to transform matter, and that the souls come in groups, in companies, and he alludes to some of this here, that, Satyavan and Savitri have known each other in many lives before, just like maybe we have known each other in lives before. Mother speaks of this, that we've met in previous lives, those that were kind of surrounding her and working towards the divine manifestation through many lives. So there's, in my last talk, there was a very interesting passage by Nolini that talks about this family of souls that kind of come together, incarnate together, that they are, in a sense, representatives of a greater oversoul, that they're kind of like emanations or incarnations of a kind of a higher, more encompassing soul. And that's why they come together life after life. But one of the things that's, I think, highlighted here, it's just that this evolutionary growth and development through lives is a battle. There are opponent powers, which I think he still will deal with a little bit more, but he's dealt with it to some extent already, these adverse powers that try to hold back the evolutionary progress, that are consciously antagonistic towards it. So, and that's what largely makes it a battle.
So there's so many of these military terms here all the way through,
Yeah.
The forts and the outposts, the bivouac, all of these things. He really builds a big scene of a whole movement like evolution.
Yeah. And you have to, I mean, it reminds us too that he's writing this kind of shortly after World War II, in which he was, consciously battling against these hostile forces that were trying to overtake the world at that time, and was quite aware of even the plight of the soldiers on the battlefield. For he appeared to some of them.
Is this in this line, in wounded slow retreats, that means when they're assaulted, then they have to stay back slowly, or in general, from illness to slowly retreat?
Yeah, sometimes the soul makes advances, it moves ahead quickly, and then it may again encounter some very hard resistance, and then it has to retreat, it has to kind of fall back, maybe to a lower level again. So just like the army sometimes makes advance and then it hits some terrible resistance and it has to retreat. And the soldiers may get wounded in that battle and have to make a wounded retreat. Yeah, but it's a metaphor for the development of the soul also. It doesn't just move ahead in a straight line. Sometimes it has to fall back. Yeah, there's this kind of cyclic movement. So I was wondering, maybe Minachi, would you like to read? Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Length?
Yeah, at length.
At length, yeah.
Yeah.
At length, his friend's indomitable line forces the last passes of the ignorance. Advancing beyond nature's last known bounds, reconnoitering the formidable unknown, beyond the landmarks of things visible, it mounts through a miraculous upper air, till climbing the mute summit of the world. He stands upon the splendor peaks of God. In vain though mourns that Satyavan must die. His death is the beginning of greater life. Death is the spirit's opportunity. A vast intention has brought two souls close, and love and death conspire towards one great end. For out of danger and pain, heaven bliss shall come. Time's unforeseen event, God's secret plan. This world was not built with random bricks of chance. A blind God is not destiny's architect. A conscious power has drawn the plan of life. There is a meaning in each curve and line. It is an architecture high and grand, by many named and nameless masons built, in which unseen hands obey the unseen. And of its master builders, she is one.
Thank you. Let's pause.
You have to take the micro loop away, otherwise it's an echo. Oh, sorry. No, it is.
So the first part of this part of the passage speaks about the soul's development at its higher reaches, perhaps when it's beginning to practice yoga or turn towards the divine. At length, at last, his front's indomitable line, this line of advance, which is incapable of being overcome, forces the last passes of the ignorance. It starts moving beyond the ignorance into the knowledge, into the spiritual knowledge, advancing beyond nature's last known bounds. So even it has developed the nature to its highest possibilities and is moving towards a divine supernature. Reconnoitering the formidable unknown. Reconnoitering is like a scout goes ahead in a battle to inspect the ground ahead to see if it's clear of the enemy. Exploring. Beyond the landmarks of things visible, it mounts through a miraculous upper air. Seems to be speaking of the higher spiritual consciousness. Till climbing the mute summit of the world, he stands upon the splendor peaks of God. Moving into the higher spiritual consciousness, he reaches a summit in which he realizes his unity with God. And then he speaks something about this fate, adverse, what seems to be adverse fate. He says, "In vain thou mournest that Satyavan must die. His death is a beginning of greater life." That relates to what he was kind of saying before about this difference between fate and our destiny, our present position on the evolutionary journey and the destination to which we're going. Death is not a finality, it's just a stage in our development. We reach an end of one chapter, we move to the next chapter. His death is the beginning of greater life. Death is the Spirit's opportunity. We tend to think of it as something tragic, an ending. But it only marks the beginning of a new chapter, a new development. And then he speaks of a vast intention behind our spiritual development, our evolution, that has brought these two souls close. And love and death conspire towards one great end. Their love for one another and his death, his fated death within 1 year, are working together towards some ultimate end which is yet to be revealed.
So if there wasn't that faith on Satyavan's head, then he wouldn't have been able to go with death, explore all the world, and overcome death. So,
nor would she have.
It seems like Mara doesn't know how the story's going to turn out. Or Shirvindu could have him say something more ambiguous, because he's talking about the present case. And it makes it sound like to the queen that too bad, the guy's going to die. Forget it. He doesn't leave an opening.
Yeah. He does die, and he will die. But then he says at the end of this, oh no, it doesn't say at the end of this, but that what's more to be revealed, we have to see. It's written in the destiny of her soul, but he is fated to die, and he does die. He's dead in her arms, but she brings him back. But I think, I get the sense that he knows, but he kind of withholds some of this. Also, he is spurring Savitri to kind of embrace this kind of destiny of hers. Yeah, he also is kind of giving them, he kind of puts out a little branch of hope, but it's a little bit vague.
We never get Savitri's response to Mara. I mean, she's not bothered by it.
Yeah. He doesn't speak after this. But she's accepted already. I mean, she knew once he declared that he would die, she says, my choice is fixed, not changing. But how she's going to respond, it's still a little bit uncertain. She says, I know too how to die. So she may just follow him into death. Or she also says, my strength is greater than my fate, or something like that. So she may confront it. So it's left ambiguous. But some of this here, these next lines are important. For out of danger and pain, heaven bliss shall come. Not only for them, but it applies to us as well. time's unforeseen event, God's secret plan. Well, this is applying especially to them, but applies to us. And then, this world was not built by random bricks of chance. A blind God is not destiny's architect. A conscious power has drawn the plan of life. There is a meaning in each curve and line. And then these last lines are also interesting. An architecture high and grand, by many named and nameless masons built. This seems to allude to the different beings, the higher beings that have a role to play in the unfolding of events here in the world. The different gods and goddesses and powers and higher beings and middle beings of the Bible all play a role in the working out of life. Nitya, let's read one more. Yes.
Line 826.
Yeah, at the indentation there, the new paragraph.
Queen, strive no more to change the secret will. Time's accidents are steps in its vast scheme. Bring not thy brief and helpless human tears across the fathomless moments of a heart that knows its single will and God's as one. It can embrace its hostile destiny. It sits apart with grief and facing death, affronting adverse fate, armed and alone. In this enormous world standing apart, in the mightiness of her silent spirit's will, in the passion of her soul of sacrifice, her lonely strength facing the universe, affronting fate, asks not man's help nor God's. Sometimes one life is charged with earth's destiny. It cries not for succor from the time-bound powers. Alone she is equal to her mighty task. Intervene not in a strife too great for thee, a struggle too deep for mortal thought to sound. Its question to this nature's rigid bounds, when the soul fronts nude of garbs the infinite, its too vast theme of a lonely mortal will, pacing the silence of eternity.
Thank you. So the queen had been trying to dissuade Savitri to continue with this marriage with Satyavan. Since he was fated to die, she asked her to choose someone else. So here Narad is saying, don't interfere in her choice. Her soul, her decision are beyond you. She knows that her will and the divine's will are one, and that it can embrace its destiny. But I think what's important in this section of the passage, which is only beginning here, it's that it really reminds us of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, more specifically, that Sri Aurobindo had left his body in 1950. The supramental descent had not yet taken place, at least on a wide scale. I mean, he had brought it down individually into his own life and mind, and perhaps at his death into his body, for it had remained for several days with a kind of a golden glow. But it was left to the mother then to complete their mission, their task, to bring down this supramental consciousness into the earth consciousness, establish kind of the next step in its evolution, a higher divine evolution. So she was left alone, mother was left alone to do this work. And I think she really felt quite acutely Sri Aurobindo's absence. At one point, she said that for years she had kind of just left the inner work largely to him, that she was just carried along. And she had a lot of the responsibility of running the ashram and that. But then when he passed away, she had to take up both work, this inner work of bringing down this supramental consciousness, and also this outer work of the ashram. But she took it all on, and within 6 years was able to bring down this higher consciousness into the earth atmosphere. So he's alluding, I think, to that as well, and in the later next part of the passage it'll continue. But he's saying, like these lines, sometimes one life is charged with earth's destiny. It cries not for succor from the time-bound powers. Alone she is equal to her mighty task. She was an embodiment of the Divine Mother, the consciousness and force of the Supreme Being. She carried the ultimate power and will with her to achieve that decisive descent of the supramental consciousness. And only that power of the divine could achieve that. Only she could do that in her embodied form. Bring it down into her body, what she did. Brought it down for the earth, but then continued for another 17 years, bringing that consciousness into her very physical frame. So we'll see more of that next time. Okay, we stop there for today.
Ashwapati answered to the seer, I deemed a mighty power had come with her. Is not that power the high compeer of fate? But Narad answered, covering truth with truth, a day may come when she must stand unhelped on a dangerous brink of the world's doom, and her carrying the world's future on her lonely breast, carrying the human hope in a heart left so to conquer or fade on a last desperate verge.
Thanks to Sri Aurobindo.